In today's episode of Everybody Who Likes Donald Trump Has Something Wrong with Him and Is a Bad Person, we have this story: how Donald Trump appeals to men secretly insecure about their manhood. Yes, you've heard it. Science has proven, according to the Washington Post, that men who like Donald Trump may actually have tiny wieners. Of course, the issue isn't really about the economy or trade or the fact that Hillary Clinton was for free trade and believed in policies that were seen as detrimental, and was seen by the left as someone who is a corporatist crony. No, in fact, the only reason, and I'm being hyperbolic, but a strong reason that men like Donald Trump is because they have tiny wieners. Plain and simple. Let's see what Washington Post has to say. But let me just thank you, Washington Post, for finally giving us the journalism we so deserve. Thank you for making this powerful argument that I can use when I talk to Trump supporters who I disagree with. I'll remember, when I go and talk to my friends who are Trump supporters, I'll just remind them, when they say they support Trump, I'll say, but clearly the only reason you do is because you have a tiny wiener. I don't know what I'll say to the women. Maybe they must have tiny wieners too, and they feel insecure about it. I don't know. But let's see what Washington Post has to say about Trump supporters and their tiny wieners. From boasting about the size of his wiener on national television to releasing records of his high testosterone levels, President Trump's rhetoric and behavior exude machismo. Is that how you pronounce it? Machismo? His behavior also seems to have struck a chord with some male voters. See, for example, the Donald Trump family. Finally, someone with balls t-shirts common at Trump rallies. But our research suggests that Trump is not necessarily attracting male supporters who are as confidently masculine as the president presents himself to be. Instead, Trump appears to appeal more to men who are secretly insecure about their manhood. We call this the fragile masculinity hypothesis. Here is some of our evidence. That's right, Trump supporters. Y'all got tiny... It's hard to say over and over again without laughing. What is fragile masculinity? Research shows that many men feel pressure to look and behave in stereotypically masculine ways, or risk losing their status as real men. And I'm sure it could be true that women feel pressure to dress in certain ways and wear makeup and things of that nature. There's this really funny meme. It was from a tweet that went around where it was like, this woman said male privilege is being able to wear the same thing over and over again without being, made fun of or whatever. And this guy responded with, the only people who care about what you're wearing, if you wear the same clothes, are women. Men literally would not remember if you wore the same cute dress twice. So it's not a male privilege issue. Basically, I think it's fair to say that women also feel pressure to be feminine. It's not unique to men. People just want to be good at being people, right? Masculine expectations are socialized from early childhood and can motivate men to embrace traditional male behaviors while avoiding even the hint of femininity. This unforgiving standard of maleness makes some men worry that they're falling short. These men are said to experience fragile masculinity, or clearly they must have tiny wieners. The political process provides a way that fragile men can reaffirm their masculinity. By supporting tough politicians and policies, men can reassure others and themselves of their own manliness. For example, sociologist Rob Willer has shown that men whose sense of masculinity was threatened increased their support for aggressive foreign policy. You ever watch Family Guy? There's this really funny Family Guy skit where Peter Griffin says that he convinced Congress to go to war. And he did it because he's in, the congressional chamber, and he goes, someone says we can't go to war, it would be a waste of money, and then Peter goes, well, that may be. But one thing is true. Anyone who doesn't want to go to war is gay. And then all of a sudden everyone goes, I want to go to war, I want to go to war. I think it's funny, but I think it's also a joke. The joke is that Congress people aren't going to go to war because their masculinity is threatened. But I'll say this, right? They have research to, this is a JSTOR article. I'm not going to say the science is wrong. No, by no means. I think it's obvious when the trope exists. But I also think it's extremely exaggerated to claim that because men feel like their masculinity is being threatened, they have tiny wieners or they're voting for Trump for that reason, right? I think this article, jokes aside, is clearly meant, they're clearly targeting men's masculinity by threatening their manhood, right? The point of this article is to use exactly what they're explaining to make men feel insecure and thus want to be like, I don't support Trump. I don't have a tiny wiener, right? You see what they're doing? They're literally doing the Peter Griffin thing here. We wanted to see whether fragile masculinity was associated with how Americans vote, and specifically whether it was associated with greater support for Trump in the 2016 general election and for Republicans in the 2018 midterm elections. And let's insecure about their manhood. Right, okay. So I'm definitely being a bit hyperbolic when I say it's about the tiny wieners. But insecure about their manhood kind of presents a certain idea, right? Manhood meaning something very specific. But I want to make sure it's clear they're talking about general masculinity, and that's what they're looking at, not wiener size. Measuring fragile masculinity poses a challenge. We could not simply do a poll of men who might not want to honestly answer questions about their deepest insecurities. Instead, we relied on Google Trends, which measures the popularity of Google search terms. As Seth Stevens Davidowitz has argued, people are often at their least guarded when they seek answers from the internet. Researchers have already used Google search patterns to estimate levels of racial prejudice in different parts of the country. We sought to do the same with fragile masculinity. Now, as much as I said it was a bit hyperbolic, they do include wiener size and wiener enlargement in their analyses. We began by selecting a set of search topics that we believed might be especially common among men concerned about living up to the ideals of manhood: erectile dysfunction, hair loss, how to get girls, wiener enlargement, wiener size, steroids, testosterone, and Viagra. With the exception of how to get girls, these are Google topics rather than individual search terms. For instance, the topic of erectile dysfunction includes searches for erectile dysfunction, ED, and impotence. But that one's kind of not so fair, right? That's a medical condition that some people, and Viagra too. These are medical conditions that affect older men, and it's not so much about them trying to make sure they appear masculine. It's about guys who are trying to treat a medical condition, which is a bit unfair to include. To validate this list of topics, we asked a sample of 300 men on Amazon's Mechanical Turk platform whether they ever had or ever would search for them online. We found that scoring high on a questionnaire measuring masculine gender role discrepancy stress, concern that they aren't as manly as their male friends, was strongly associated with interests in these search topics. Although these men were not a representative sample of American men, their responses suggest that these search terms are a valid way to capture fragile masculinity. How fragile masculinity was related to voting behavior. We measured the popularity of these search topics in every media market in the country during the years preceding the past 3 presidential elections. In the map below, darker colors show where these searches were most prevalent in 2016. We can see it's predominantly the South, stretching up through, like Tennessee, Kentucky, etc. It seems pretty balanced when you look at the Northeast, the Midwest, and the West. So maybe they're saying this is like the densely Republican area, although I think it's fair to say you got Ohio over here. Ohio went red, Wisconsin went red, Michigan went red. I don't understand what are you trying to say? Florida went red, but the darkest portions are around Texas. And I'm pretty sure, actually, this portion of Texas, all down the border, it's all blue, right? It's all blue, okay? It's Democrat. We found that support for Trump in the 2016 election was higher in areas that had more searches for topics such as erectile dysfunction. Moreover, this relationship persisted after accounting for demographic attributes in media markets, such as education levels and racial composition, as well as searches for topics unrelated to fragile masculinity, such as breast augmentation and menopause. However, it's also important to point out that older people tend to be conservative. They also tend to be the ones suffering from erectile dysfunction. You're not going to find a 27-year-old you're not likely to find a 27-year-old who's suffering from ED. And I'm sure even if they were, they'd probably still vote blue. Okay, I don't think the defining factor as to why people voted for Trump was whether or not their willies are working right or whether or not it's big enough. I think it's silly because, listen, correlation is not causation. Sure, you can find a correlation here between these two subjects. What's really weird, though, is that they don't point out you could probably find a correlation between these subjects and football teams and a bunch of other subjects. This is one of the things that people who aren't in the science don't seem to understand. That this is a single data point that means basically nothing. Nothing. What are the other common factors in these areas? How do you rectify the disparity between these dense search areas that are talking about fragile masculinity and the other areas that voted for Trump that are not as dense, right? So we can look at part of Wisconsin that part of Wisconsin is not searching for these issues, but here we have a part of New York which is. Are we going to then this is the problem. Okay, how do you account for the part of New York which is blue? How do you account for most of Wisconsin, which is red, when it's inverted? You see what I'm saying? This is a silly argument. Let's go to their takeaway. What's their takeaway? Our data suggests that fragile masculinity is a critical feature of our current politics. Nonetheless, points of caution are in order. First, the research reported here is correlational. Thank you. So I jumped the gun. I should have pointed out they addressed that. We can't be entirely sure that fragile masculinity is causing people to vote in a certain way. However, given that experimental work has identified a causal connection between masculinity concerns and political beliefs, we think the correlations we've identified are important. Absolutely important, sure, but multivariate. So you shouldn't conclude, and I think an article like this would be premature. Second, it remains to be seen whether any link between fragile masculinity and voting will persist after Trump exits the national stage. We suspect, however, that Trump's re-engineering of the GOP as a party inextricably tied to Americans' identity concerns, whether based on race, religion, or gender, will ensure that fragile masculinity remains a force in politics. Sure. Now, you have this one subject. You have, they say it's causational. We don't know if it's true. It's one iota of data. And it's fair to say that the inverse can also be true. That men who are extremely secure in their manhood, who have high testosterone, are also more likely to be Republicans. That's another fact. So the contradictory thing that needs to be pointed out here is that men who have lower testosterone have been associated with Democrats and socialism. So what are they really saying? These are men who have high testosterone, who vote Republican, who are macho guys, who are concerned about not being macho enough. It doesn't really tell you that much, and neither of that data is conclusive. I think it's silly that the Washington Post would put up a monkey cage analysis saying how Donald Trump appeals to men secretly insecure about their manhood, and then end by saying, well, it's not necessarily true, but we think it's important, and thank you for the headline. And just so you all remember, the Washington Post, real journalism. If you like Donald Trump, you got a tiny willy. Yes, that's science. Great. Good job, Washington Post. Stick around. I've got more videos coming up on this channel.